I am extremely happy to be back in Qatar after some time. I haven't been here for more than 10 years, so things have changed quite a bit since I was last here. And people who have been here, who were here as recently as 2 years ago, also tell me that things have changed in 2 years. So I expect that we'll see more rapid change. Well, I want to get something out of the way right at the very beginning. And that is that one of the longest running battles, and I'll call it a toponymic battle. And toponym is a word for a place name. It revolves around the nomenclature of the Gulf. I even received an email, not just one, but several, that admonished me to use the term Persian Gulf when referring to the body of water between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. And I explained to the writer that although I do, as a rule, I do use Persian Gulf in my writing, my purpose in this paper, in any case, was to call into question the nature of the identity of the people who live in this region. And rather than identifying them either as Persian or Arab or calling this body of water the Persian Gulf or the Arabian Gulf, I want to make a case for these individuals as residents of this region, whether they're on the Iranian side or on the Arabian side, independent of an exclusive Arab or Persian identity. And so I very much like a term that is used commonly in the region, and occasionally for people who live in this region themselves, and that's the term Khaliji, which I think is appropriate, and it's very appropriate, especially for this talk tonight. And so I'll be referring to this body of water as Khalij, and I'll be referring to the people who live in this region as Khaliji. And this has the virtue of working in Arabic, in Persian, and in South Asian languages as well, and it's also very expressive. When you say Khaliji, it means something different than the names of either of the nationalities that we find on either side of the Gulf. Now, this essay and this attempt is partly a thought exercise. But I believe that considering the population of the region to have a more internal cultural communality than explicit ties either with the Arab or the Persian cultural world makes sense ethnographically, and I am an anthropologist, but it partially explains why there's been so much controversy over the nomenclature of the region and so much additional hostility over the matters such as the possession of some of the islands that actually lie in between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. So it's my contention that actually this community of bicultural individuals would have greater self-recognition if it had not been enmeshed early in the colonial period as a field for territorial competition. The early imposition of state structures in the region, which had been blissfully absent for centuries and centuries, caused an overlay of state identity which has served to obscure the basic communalities between the members of the population of this region. Social scientists have been pursuing questions of community and identity for a very, very long time. But in recent years, it's become extremely popular. The work of Benedict Anderson and Hobsbawm, who just recently died, I'm sorry to say, Eric Hobsbawm, a very, very great historian and great social scientist, the renewed interest in the work of Ernst Hauptbach's in determining ethnic identity has frequently placed the focus of the locus of identity on an individual or on a group. These communities become Thus, communities become imagined communities when enough people believe they belong and develop symbols and institutions that unite them. Now, the Khalijis, the people of the Khalij, is the opposite. It is an unimagined community. A community in fact, but not in name and not in its social identification. The roots of the existence of a community, of this community, are centuries old, and so now so very commonplace that many of the people who live in the region don't even bother to think about it. Now, linguistically, the people who live in this region form what we call in linguistic anthropology a Sprachbund. That's a German term for the joining of languages, the overlapping of languages. It's an area of overlapping languages that mutually influence each other. If we look around the region, we see that many, many people living on either side of the Khalij are fully bilingual and frequently tri- and quadlingual. The borrowed vocabulary between Arabic and Persian sometimes makes this difficult to detect, but nonetheless, you find a very distinct Persian intonation in some areas on the Arabian Peninsula where there's been heavy influence from the Iranian side, and you find a very definite Arabic influence on the Persian that's spoken on the Iranian side as a result of Arab residency there for a long time, and intermarriage and contact between these populations. So, as belittling as befitting an unimagined community, then the boundaries of this region are very fluid, as are the conditions which bind the residents together. In fact, in its social makeup, the region of the Khalij may most be akin to, for instance, the Caribbean in North America, with a distinct culture and feel to it that is neither exactly completely Arab nor exactly completely Iranian or Persian, but rather a creolized mixture of both of them. A very dear departed colleague, David DeCamp, whom probably many of you won't know because he did work in Jamaica primarily for his field work, talked about a creolized population, and one finds people in a creolized population existing either at one end of a Creole continuum or at the other end of a Creole continuum, but most of the people live in the middle, and they have some features of both of these. And I want to show you, this is, first of all, this is the Gulf. But if we take a look at, I don't want to give you too much theory and bore you too much, but if you take a look at this scale, you see what DeCamp did in talking about these, this creolized situation. He took some features, linguistic features, that characterized either a pure Jamaican population with features that are African and Wino, Indian, on one end, and features that are English on the other end. And in Jamaica, that's what you find. You find people who have both characteristics of native Caribbean and African ancestry, and people who are English. So that number 5 here, if you take a look at this chart here, where you have somebody saying that says child, eat, and that, and granny and didn't is going to be a completely anglicized person. But a person who says piknini for child or nyam for eat, a very common term, African term, and drops T's and drops D's and says grands instead of granny, and instead of saying didn't says no ben, is going to be fully Jamaicanized or fully Caribbeanized. But if you take a look at this chart, you see that most people fall somewhere in between. And this is an implicational scale, so that if you have characteristic 2, then it's likely that you're going to have all the characteristics to the left. So I just wanted to get this clear for you. Now, such communities come about as a result of historical factors. These are migration, trade, shifting colonial boundaries, or the results of intermarriage and cultural borrowing that take place naturally when populations come into contact. For those of you who've been in West Africa, you know this is how the language Swahili was developed, because Swahili is a creolized language that's the result of the interrelationship between Arabic and the native languages of East Africa. And almost everyone I think of you knows that Swahili comes from Sahel, so it's Swahili. It means the coastal language. So we have these European migrants and colonists. So an example an extreme example in the Caribbean is the language Papiamento. Papiamento is which derives from at least 7 different languages in the Caribbean. And it comes from the Spanish / Brazilian word papear, to chat or to talk. Now, the Gulf, the Khalij, concentrates on an equally rich melange of cultural differences, of Arabic, Persian, South Asian, East African, Portuguese, French, and English, just to name a few of them. And so wave after wave of travelers from ancient times have contributed to this mix. The impenetrability of the geography that separates the Khalij from inner regions added to the concentration of this melange. People living on the coast of the Khalij found that it was much easier to communicate with each other than it was to communicate with people who lived inland from this area. Communication by boat, easy. Communication to the inland of Iran with that big high plateau, very, very hard. Communication to the inland of the Arabian Peninsula with that very difficult desert passage was also hard. So going back and forth across the Gulf, very easy. So before modern air transportation, a trip from the Iranian coast to the inland city of Shiraz might take a week, but a boat could reach Dubai in a day and a half, maybe 2 days, and if it was a sailboat, 2 days. If you had a good wind, of course. Moreover, these boats could transport a lot. They could transport much more with far less physical effort than human beings or pack animals could transport. So the trade was easy, and it made it very, very, very economically lucrative for everyone. So on the analogy of the DeCamp Gutman scales for Jamaica, one might do the same with the Gulf population. You might talk about a scale that includes linguistic habits of cuisine, dress patterns, marriage patterns, religious rituals, discourse structures, and you'd find some individuals who speak Arabic all the time, will wear Arab clothing exclusively, will drink Arab coffee, and here's the coffee on the left-hand side, and have families with polygynous members. And at the opposite antipode are people who would be individuals who speak Persian exclusively, wear a shirt and trousers if they're male, or a dress or a chador or a manteau if they're a female, drink tea primarily, and come from families that are predominantly monogamous. Now, this is a rough and ready list, and the items and the characteristics that one could analyze in order to talk about the Creolization of this population are, in order to obtain a snapshot, are the cultural elements that characterize Khalijis society. Now, what you'll find is that, like in the Caribbean, most people are in the middle. And so, when you have most people in the middle, what happens? They have both complexes of things. The primarily Persian speakers speak some Arabic. Maybe they speak a lot of Arabic. Maybe they're fully bilingual. They're right in the middle. If they have characteristic dress of the Arabian Peninsula, they also have shirt and trousers that they might put on at some other point in time. If they have coffee and the accoutrements for coffee, they probably also have something to make tea with. So that all of these things are coexisting. And it is not the case that if you go to Isfahan or Tehran, that people are going to have the material culture that's characteristic of Arab civilization. And if you go to Jeddah, you're probably not going to have the accoutrements that are common to Iranian civilization, civilizational structures. So we can take a look at this, at these sorts of candidates for scaling. For food, fish, dates, rice, lamb, Arab coffee, tea, butter, cheese. Interesting, and for language, you have Persian and Arabic as possible, antipodes on the scale. So the social customs, there seems to be more polygyny on the Arab side of the Khalij. Men eat together, more commonly on the Arab side of the Khalij. And the sofre is an Iranian custom, but also common to the Arab world. And then the qalyun, or the shisha, which is not so common in Iran, but it is found, but it's ubiquitous if you're on the Arab side of the continuum. And the dishdasha and the niqab and the chador are all characteristic forms of dress, and you don't find them evenly distributed, but you find some people who have all of these forms of dress. And the architecture is also interesting. The madhaf is a characteristic Arab form, as you all know. The hoz is a pool in the middle of the courtyard that most Iranians have, and the notion of a balk. We all love gardens, but an Iranian garden is a little bit different than an Arab garden, and it's fun to see how people mix these architectural features up in dealing with their everyday life. So if we take a look at the cultural influences in Khaliji society, I mentioned earlier that the Gulf communities held together largely by patterns of trade and commerce, and these historical patterns have existed for a long time, for more than a millennium. And the original patterns were occasioned by the so-called, and I don't like to use the word, the so-called Dao trade. Dao is an Anglicism. The Dao doesn't really exist in common vernacular. More commonly, people will call a ship an actual, kayak or a lanch, motor lanch. But the African influence is found very strongly in one of the most important and characteristic ritual forms in the Gulf. This is a curing ritual that involves shaman-like practitioners going from place to place in order to expel spirits from individuals who seem to be suffering from oftentimes what amounts to what Westerners would call psychological difficulties. And this is the czar. The woman on the left and on the far right, this is from the czar in Bahrain, but the people in the middle are practicing the czar on the island of Qishm in Iran. And you find the czar in Bushehr, you find it really throughout the entire region. It operates kind of under the radar for a highly urbanized place like Qatar, but I wouldn't be surprised. I've never seen the Czar in Qatar, but I wouldn't be surprised to find it. And it might be something for those of you who are intrepid anthropology students, might be something for you to look for in this area. So the Czar, though, is found absolutely throughout East Africa, and it's been widely studied. In some people think it came actually originally from Ethiopia, but so this is a communality that we have between African society and the society of the Khalij. It extends into Iran and onto the Arabian Peninsula. Now, the trade, the ship trade, followed the currents up and down the East African coast, and you can see that it extends all the way to India, so that Bombay can literally be thought of as an important cultural component for the Khalij region, as well as places far-flung as Zanzibar or the Comoros Islands. The Comoros, way down in South Africa, you may know the origin of the Comoros. The name Comoros comes from the Arabic Qamar. So these are the islands of the moon, way farther south, and also a direct consequence of the trade that took place. So now I've got to mention something to you here, and that is my introduction to the Middle East came, and I'm giving away too much about my biography when I tell you that it was in the 1960s. When I was a college student, I was working for an oil company as a result of my having grown up in Oklahoma, one of the oil areas in the United States. I came to the end of, I was employed on a drilling rig that was off of the Iranian coast on Lavan Island, which also has the name Sheikh Shoaib. And I enjoyed myself so much that I spent an additional 6 months on this island and fell in with merchants who were traveling throughout the entire region. So this was my first exposure to the Middle East, and I spent my time on boats sailing up and down the Khalij from Kuwait to Oman. This was quite an adventure for a kid, but I realized afterwards that I had visited every port and every island in the entire Khalij region. Maybe not every one, but virtually every commercial port, and definitely every island. So I've been on some islands that nobody else has really set foot on since I think that time, like Little Toom and in Siri and things like that. But so this was a very important time, and it was a time when I first was exposed to both Persian and Arabic, and it means that, for me anyway, my first love in the Middle East is not either Iran nor Arabia nor Egypt, although I love all those places, but actually this region, the Khalij. I am romantically attached to it as an area that was my first exposure. So the trade connections throughout this region have been well documented since antiquity, and others have dealt with these things extensively. There's a lot of history, but there are several events in modern times that have shaped and reinforced the patterns of interconnection that have taken place, that have bound the members of the Khaliji community together. In the modern historical period, Iranians migrated to the Arabian Peninsula, and Arabs migrated to the Iranian mainland, and in particular, during the period following the demise of the Safavids, who started in the 17th century, In the early 18th century, there was a weakness in the central Iranian regime. This is the period that in Iranian history, the Zand period, the Afshar period, and the Qajar and the early Qajar period, and on the Arabian Peninsula under Ottoman rule. During the 19th century, all of you will perhaps remember that this was the rise of the family of Ibn Saud, and there was a continual war between the family of Ibn Saud and the Rashidi clan. And so they were much occupied, the peninsula was much occupied with these kinds of internal conflicts and with weakness in on the Iranian side. It more or less left the Khalij to its own devices. So people were able to be virtually self-governing. It was an area of very, very little central state control during this time. Frankly, the Iranians didn't care much about the Khalij at all. They paid almost no attention to it. They had no military operations going on. And what happened was that on the Iranian coast, you had Sheikhli families, in particular in Bandar Lenge on the Iranian coast, and in Hormuz on the Iranian coast, and the Sheikhli families on the Arabian side of the Khalij later became the states that coalesced into United Arab Emirates, Qatar, Bahrain, and Kuwait, and they were able to rise independently of the central authorities because of this essential political weakness that was taking place. Now, the British during the same time were adamant to protecting the trade routes to India. And so they were able to establish their political influence throughout the region, and it was in their interest to make sure that that things were stable and protected, although they didn't. We can argue about whether they exercised state control over the region or not. But it was in their interest to have local authorities who were able to promote stability and mostly keep the pirates away, which is what the British were most concerned about looting of ships and so forth. Now, Louise Sweet, who is a great anthropologist who died some time ago, but one of our ancestresses in dealing with the Society of the Middle East, has made a very strong case for a post-Safavid Khaliji society based on a unique combination of political control, also the pearling industry, which provided a tremendous amount of wealth for the region during this time, and also seafaring skills, which was somewhat unique in the Middle East at that time. Certainly not very many Iranians outside of the Khaliji region knew much about sailing. And at the same time, we have a sailing tradition in South Arabia, in the Hadramaut and in Yemen, but the great sailing tradition is here in the Khalij. So these three things together, pearling, sailing, and a unique kind of governmental structure, formed a unified kind of cultural form. Now, I think that there are several events that had a profound effect on changing this unified community in the Khalij into something that was still culturally unified, but gradually pulled apart as a result of state and historical processes. First was the ouster of the family, the Sheikhli family, the Al-Qasemis, from Bandar Lenge by the British in 1887. This was combined with tariffs that were imposed on the Gulf ports by the Iranian government at the instigation of the British. The Al-Qasimis had a huge enterprise going in Bandar Lenge. They also had interests in Sharjah, in Dubai, and I'll show you a picture later. And as I think most of you know, they now are the rulers of Ras Al Khaimah. So this is a family. The Qasimis have been in the Khalij for a very, very long time, and have had a dominant influence on the governmental structures during this time. But they moved from the Iran side exclusively to the Arabian Peninsula before the beginning of the 20th century. And the second is the consolidation of Iran under Reza Pahlavi, the first Pahlavi Shah, and the consolidation of Saudi Arabia under Ibn Saud in 1922 or so. Then the next important feature in terms of history is the abandonment of the Gulf, of the Khaliji region by the British in 1971, 1972, when they pulled out and completely removed their military presence and their governmental presence from the region. And finally, the Iranian Revolution of 1978, 1979, which caused a break in an alliance that was not naturally forged by the people of the region, but was more or less constructed by the United States. The United States saw the people of the region of the Arabian Peninsula and Iran as constituting what they called the twin pillars of a bulwark against the incursion of the Soviet Union during the Cold War. And the Iranian Revolution in 1978, 1979 actually broke this. So the British, I'm going to go back and look at these individually. The British began to exert their influence in the Gulf region at the beginning of the Khaliji region at the beginning of the 19th century. The Qawasim were recalcitrant, and they were labeled as pirates. They were called pirates. They were really just entrepreneurs. They were a very successful, wealthy, entrepreneurial family. But you know, in British parlance, anybody who opposed the British or was doing better work than doing better trade than the British was going to be labeled as a pirate. So there was a British-led expedition against the Qawasim in 1806, 1809, and in 1819, 1820. And as a result, they established a treaty with many of the sheikdoms on the coast that was designed to curb the influence of the Qawasim during this time. The notion of the Qawasim as pirates has been bitterly opposed by the family today, and they've written several books of attacking the British for this scurrilous insult to their honor, because they were not, in their own view, and I think in my view too, they really weren't pirates. They were just very successful, and they didn't want British trade in their territory any more than the British didn't want their trade in their territory. So the British were successful in ousting the Qawasim from Bandar Lenge in 1887, and then in 1903, finally, there were high tariffs that were imposed on Bandar Lenge, which for all intents and purposes was a complete free port until the beginning of the 20th century. Now, the reason that the tariffs were imposed was that I don't want to take too much time, but what's happening in Iran is that Iranians didn't drink coffee or didn't drink tea until the beginning of the 19th century. They drank coffee just like everyone on the Arabian Peninsula. Tea was introduced by the Russians from China, from the north, in the beginning of the 19th century, and it became very, very fashionable. And then the Russians got wind of the fact that the Iranians really had this taste for tea, and they began to impose customs duties on the tea being imported from the north. So enterprising, the enterprising Qawasim started to bring in tea from the south through Banderlinge. And this tea was flooding the market without any tariff. And the British realized that there was a lot of money to be made from this. And so they persuaded the Iranians to impose this customs duty on tea, which essentially completely eliminated the trade. And the Qawasim then moved their free port enterprise to the other side of the Gulf, to Dubai, and the rest is history. So we have the successful free port in Dubai now, and not no longer in Banderlinge. And too bad for the Iranians; they could have had a good thing with with this particular thing. I'm going to have to move on quickly. I'm having too much fun. Here's Sir Lewis Pelly, who also pointed out. I'll read just a little bit. He wrote, "The Sheikh of Lenge is an Arab and claims to be a descendant of a family that emigrated to the Persian Gulf period at the period when the Arabs were at the height of their power in Baghdad during the Abbasid period. He is, I believe, related to the Ras Al Khaimah Sheikh on the opposite coast. No import duty or export duty is due at Lenge and is probably to that fact and to that of geographical position, having preserved the port from governmental interference, that its hitherto prosperity is due." The Iranian Revolution removed the Iranian pillar from the Twin Pillars policy and ushered in this regional competition over the Khalij. And we had renewed ties, and when this took place, some zealots in Iran began to talk about Bahrain, and how Bahrain was an Iranian province briefly during the Safavid period 200 years before, and that made everyone very nervous. But more importantly, we had these three little islands: the Greater and Lesser Tum, and Abu Musa. And I want you all to know these are rocks. They're really nothing. But in and of themselves, there's nothing there. But because I've been on all of them. But there's now an Iranian military base there. But if you see, the tombs are important, and why? Because they lie at the gate of the Straits of Hormuz. And so all of the oil industry, which was not prominent during the 19th century, suddenly becomes extremely important during the 20th century and vital to the world after World War II. So that these little islands that would have otherwise no importance at all in the world suddenly become extremely important because they could be used as the base for an operation to block shipping in and out of the Gulf. Now they're disputed between Iran and I'm blocking. It's either Dubai or Sharjah, but in any case, but I think it's Dubai. But now, by extension, they're disputed between Iran and the United Arab Emirates. They're occupied by Iran, and the situation has never been resolved. So this constitutes a state-level problem, difficulty that causes a degree of separation between these states. So the unified ethnic composition of the Gulf is then masked by the international economic and travel processes. Another interesting development during this period was the development of the island of Kish off of the Iranian coast. I was in Quiche, I'll tell you, before Quiche was Quiche. I stayed in the home of the Sheikh of Quiche and his extensive family, and it was truly a beautiful island. Here's the shipping lanes, by the way, of the Gulf of Hormuz. And now Quiche is an international resort with fancy hotels like this, and it also used to be a place where if you were in Dubai and you needed to renew your visa, you could fly to Quiche and turn around the same day, have a nice dinner, and then turn around the same day and then come back. So the development of Quiche establishes an Iranian outpost right here. So I'm going to move on very quickly, but first I want to, here's Sheikh Sakhr bin Mohammed al-Qasimi and the Crown Prince Sheikh Khalid bin Sakhr al-Qasimi, who was ousted from power, but the al-Qasimi family remains firmly ensconced in Ras al-Khaimah as the rulers. Now, if you take a look at the trade routes that still exist in the Khalij, you see here are some of the shipping routes that take place, and you see that it's a total network of shipping going from one side of the Khalij to the other, and encompassing almost all of these places. The place in the center is Bandar Linge, by the way, which still is a major center for shipping, and all up and down the coast. The island on which I lived is on the far left at the top. It's Lavan Island. Now, this is another very important point. Those of you who live in Qatar, I hope you're aware of the fact that that the South Arabian gas field exists between Qatar and the South Pars gas field between Qatar and Iran, and it is the largest natural gas field in the world. And it's a major potential source of future income for both Iran and for Qatar. And this is one of the reasons that Qatar enjoys, if I may make a judgment, relatively friendly relations with Iran. This is it's an economic interest that really cannot go away. Now, if you look on the Iranian coast here, you see Asaluye. Asaluye is now becoming a major industrial complex. And right now there's a huge international airport being built. Right now there's an airport in the nearby town of La Merde, and you may fly every day, twice a day, between Doha and La Merde. And La Merde is a teeny little town, but it's near this industrial complex. And this is how our engineers and others who are cooperating on this gas field get back and forth between Doha and the Iranian coast. And we have flights between Doha and Lar, another Iranian town which supplies huge numbers of workers for the Gulf, and the Laris are very wealthy within Iran. So I'm going to finish by telling you about three families of the Gulf. The first is the Kermati family. The Kermatis come from a village around Shiraz. Asadullah, the father, is the son of a settled Qashqai chief, a Turkish Qashqai chief. His wife comes from Bushehr, however, on the Iranian coast. His two sons have moved to the Gulf coast, to the Gulf of the Khalij in order to work in the petrochemical industry. One lives in Bushehr and the other lives near Ahvaz. One of his daughters married an Iranian citizen who then moved to Dubai after the revolution. Two of his other daughters have married locally around Shiraz. Now the son who lives in Bushehr married a woman whose mother came from Bahrain and whose father's family was from Bandar Genave, north of Boucher. Early in the 20th century, the family had boats and they traveled back and forth between Boucher and Bahrain. That was their regular travel route. The Kermatis in Shiraz live in a traditional modern Iranian house, steel framed with mud brick and plaster walls. They have a sitting room for guests, a courtyard with a pool and a garden, and other rooms used for sleeping and eating. All the married members of the family are monogamous. Now the next family is the Hamadi family, or Hamadi family. The Hamadis come originally from Rostock, which is an island, which is an inland town that's southwest of Bandar Lenge, which I showed you before. I first met one of the brothers of the family, Suleiman, on Lavan Island where I was living. He had a shop as a merchant. He had 4 other brothers. One lived in Dubai, one lived in Rostock in the family family home, and one lived in Kuwait where he was working in the oil industry, and one lived in Bandar Abbas on the Iranian side. Some of his uncles called themselves Hamadi because family names only became required by the government during the reign of Reza Shah. Suleiman had a wife on Lavan Island. He had a CIRS wife, a temporary contractual Shia wife. If those of you who don't know what that is, I'll be glad to explain it to you later. However, he was Sunni. And I asked him how he was able to contract a CIRS relationship, which is a Shia tradition, if he was Sunni. And he was quite matter of fact. He said, nobody ever asked. So his brother had 2 wives, one in Bandar Abbas and one in Rostock. And the brother in Rostock was monogamous, and the brother in Kuwait was unmarried, but he was planning on marrying his cousin. So over the years, Suleiman had children both by his Aqd wife, his official wife, and under Islamic law, and his CIRS wife, to whom he remained surprisingly faithful. He was a regular travel to Sharjah and Dubai by boat, which he needed for his merchandising, and his everyday dress on Lavan Island was Western, but sometimes he wore a dishdasha within his household, and whenever he went to Sharjah or Dubai, he always wore dishdasha on his trip to those places. So in recent years, he stopped traveling himself because he got old, and started sending his 22 and 20-year-old sons, who still take wheat and agricultural products from Bandar Maqam, Chiru, or Bandar Lenge to the United Arab Emirates, and also chicken, which is very welcome now on the Arabian Peninsula. Suleiman lives in a compound with a separate madhaf for receiving male visitors. And he's fully bilingual. He speaks both Arabic and Persian. He speaks to his wife most commonly in Arabic, and to his sons most commonly in Persian, since they were educated in Iranian schools. However, his sons are also fluent Arabic speakers, but they confess that they don't write Arabic very well. So now the third family, the Al-Khalifa family, lives in Dubai. The patriarch, Musa, claims to be pure Arab, but his ancestry comes from the area around Bandar Lenge in Iran and Bandar Abbas. His sons are predominantly Arab speakers, but they also know enough Persian to carry out a conversation. His 3 sons all live in Dubai in a large family compound. Each son with his family has a quarter to themselves within the family compound. The oldest, who's now over 40, has 2 wives, each of which has her own room at the opposite end of the compound. They appear friendly, and they're distantly related both to each other and to their husband. The middle son married late in his 30s to a maternal cousin, and the youngest married a girl who was the sister of a male good school friend. 3 of Musa's daughters, 4 daughters, are married to men from the UAE, but the 4th is married to an Iranian shopkeeper in Shiraz, who saw her when he was there on vacation. When she was there on vacation, sorry. There was some discomfort in allowing this marriage, but the family now commutes freely between Shiraz and Dubai, and there's nonstop flights between the 2 cities. The Khalifa men all eat together for the main meal of the day, though they take breakfast with their wives and their children. And they switch between eating something in the evening with their father in the central mudhaf and with their wives and children. The children, all cousins, are everywhere. It's unclear to whom they belong. They run riot over the entire place. They are as likely to be hugged and petted by their uncles or aunts as their parents. And the Khalifas maintain a family residence in Shiraz in the area called Qasradasht, a very nice area of Shiraz, in the garden area in the west side of the city. They travel there regularly through the summer and the fall, and with so many flights from Dubai every day, it's really very easy. So the men wear dishtashas in Dubai, but they switch to trousers and shirts when they go to Shiraz. And the two of the sons and the father somehow have Iranian passports as well as their UAE passports. Go figure. I don't ask, I don't inquire very carefully about these things. The family are all merchants. They have retail enterprises throughout the UAE, and they import a variety of things, largely building and construction materials from all around the Khalij and even from India and Europe. The middle son carried the burden of business for many years, traveling extensively, which may explain why he married so late. Now, you compare these three families, and you see that they all have a presence that encompasses the entire region. Now, here are the air routes. There's some air routes that you see, and you look at Shiraz and how important that is. Look at Dubai and Kuwait. But here are the three families. It's a little hard to see them very well, but the red are it's supposed to be orange, but it came out red on this. Is the Kermati family, the blue, the Hamadi family, and the green is the Al Khalifa family. And so if you see that that their patterns of living are slightly different. The Kermatis live in a more Iranian fashion. They've married outside of their family. They're monogamous. They speak Persian. The Al Khalifa family is more on the Arab side of the continuum. Nevertheless, they have these ties to Iran. And the Hamadi family is kind of in the middle. You know, they kind of span the two cultural traditions very, very nicely. And this is what exactly I think we expect to find in a Creolized society. We don't expect to find uniformity. What we expect to find, though, are the characteristics of two polarities in culture that are going to be differentially exhibited by people who live within this Creolized society. And so I've gone way over the time that I was supposed to have. I'm very sorry, but I got all wound up and excited about talking to you about this. But what I think I want to point out to you is that, you know, in the United States, there are people who are influential with the U.S. government, who are continually saying that there's going to be a fighting war breaking out between people on the Arab Peninsula and Iranians, and that people on the Arab Peninsula are afraid of Iran because Iran is going to, I don't know, drop a bomb on them or something. But it strikes me that, you know, when you look down at the personal level, you look at families, you look at the culture and the shared cultural traditions, this seems virtually impossible. There may be something going on at the state level that's important to take note of, but at the personal level, this is an area where people are very, very comfortable with each other, and the traditions, the shared cultural traditions, the shared understandings, the shared history, and the shared economic activity that takes place between the people who live within the Khalij makes me very hopeful that none of these dire predictions about violence in the region will take place. That they largely are an artifact of state politics and not an artifact of culture or antipathy between people in the region. So thank you very much, and I'm sorry to have gone so far over time.